Oh my gosh. I know this is a really hot topic for a lot of people. But for me, it's a pretty exciting time because I really can see a lot of gaps in the way our system is operating. A lot of harm that's happening and has been happening for decades, but now it's really a lot of division, a lot of hate towards the law enforcement, and a lot of hate towards back and forth. And I get really excited to think about, like, how do we help law enforcement and first responders heal? So being able to go to a national sheriff's conference recently, I was really able to kind of start wrapping my head around the culture of law enforcement from an outsider's perspective, and hearing the sorrow that a lot of the sheriffs at that conference were really expressing on how all they really want to do is good. And what's happening is they're now recognizing their system policies as a stay alive method rather than a peace officer method. And I'm not saying that that's every law enforcement location. There are some amazing organizations that are, law enforcement organizations that are trying to do things different or have been doing them different. But the majority have been taught to pull their boots up by their pants up by the bootstraps or whatever that's called. And even if they just got shot at, they might go have one therapy group or be mandated to see a counselor. But here's where we get tricky. They're not going to talk too much about what's really happening inside. They've just been traumatized as well. And so when you think about Dr. Dan Siegel and his hand-brain model, that's where the prefrontal cortex gets flipped when you're in fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or faint. What's happening is now law enforcement are rolling naturally in a continuous flipped state of mind especially when they go to work. It's interfering with their jobs, it's interfering with the way they interact with the public, it's interfering with their families, it's interfering with their personal self-wellness. And if we're not giving law enforcement and beyond the opportunity to feel safe enough to have a conversation about what's really going on internally so that they can process with their peers, then we're missing the boat, because we can't just go in and train them to do things differently. This is a historical problem. They have been trained to stay alive, and because of that, a lot of harm happens because they're reactive rather than responsive. And I believe, because I know a lot of law enforcement, I have friends that are law enforcement, I have family member that's law enforcement, and I've been on the other end of the law enforcement. And so as my other brother, and one of the things that we can honestly say is nobody wants to go out and just hurt people. Our human bodies can only take so much stress and tension, and then we become activated from trauma. Little traumas, big traumas, and beyond. And if we're walking around in our lives, our work, our families, our in society, with a fight, flight, freeze, fawn, or faint reaction state of mind, which is a trauma activation, and our lid is flipped for years, then how are we supposed to not be reactive? So we're going in, we're training individuals that are in law enforcement. We have law enforcement on our team that have retired, that believe in what we're doing. We're training them in trauma awareness, their internal traumas, so they can have an external practice. We're training them in coaching one another and in peer support. Not peer support like the recovery world. Peer support for law enforcement, peers. And why are we doing that? Because they are people too, and they deserve to have the opportunity to become well as learn how to act and respond to the individuals that are on the other end of the spectrum.